In the quiet alley between two clay walls of an old town, Yumi knelt beside the stone well. She had been there for hours, her movements unhurried and precise. Her hands moved to open a small box she kept at her side. Inside were strings of different colors. She took out a single piece and began threading it through beads that lay nearby. The sunlight slanted in long, thin strips across the alley floor. From the other end of the passageway came a hesitant approach. A man appeared, his steps careful and slow. He stopped when he saw her and cleared his throat. "Hello," he said softly. Yumi glanced up without pausing. She offered him a small nod before returning to her work. "Are you waiting for someone?" the man asked. "No." Yumi's voice was calm, but there was no hint of invitation in it. "I am Taro," he said after a moment. "I'm just passing through." Yumi continued threading beads onto the string without interruption, only pausing to dip her fingers into the box for another piece when needed. The light glinted off her hands as she worked. "You seem so focused on your task," Taro remarked quietly. She met his gaze briefly and then looked back down at her work. "Is that unusual?" Taro smiled slightly, though there was no amusement in it. He shifted from one foot to the other. "I've never seen anyone thread beads with such intent." Yumi made another precise motion with her hands before replying. "Each bead has its place," she said simply. Without speaking again, Taro took a step closer and squatted beside Yumi. He looked at her handiwork and reached out tentatively to touch the string of beads she had just completed. They were uneven in size and color but perfectly strung together with each piece touching the next. "Can I try?" he asked quietly. Yumi handed him a strand and some additional beads from the box. Taro began threading, moving his fingers with deliberate care over the pieces of glass and stone. He placed them on the string one by one, fitting them carefully in place. They worked side by side for what felt like hours. The only sounds were the soft clinking of beads sliding against each other and the occasional murmur as Taro asked about certain shapes or colors. When the box was empty, Yumi's hands finally stilled. She held up their completed work, a long strand of multicolored beads that hung between them like a delicate chain of decision. "Thank you," she said quietly to Taro. Taro smiled softly and nodded as he stood up, straightening out his clothes. He looked down at the string Yumi still held in her hands. "Where will it go now?" he asked gently. Yumi's gaze followed his line of sight for a moment before lifting back to him. She gave no explanation but instead handed the strand over silently. Taro took it, turning it between his fingers thoughtfully as if deciding how best to hold on to it himself. He started walking away then, but paused at the end of the alley and turned back toward her one last time. "This was different," he said quietly before continuing down the street. Yumi watched him go for a moment longer, then returned her attention to the box again. She reached in once more for another strand and began threading beads with renewed focus and quiet determination.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The shadows lengthened, wrapping around the alley like cool fingers. In the candlemaker's workshop, the air was thick with beeswax and resin as dusk fell.
In the candlemaker's workshop at dusk, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and resin. The maker, a man named Tan, sat at his table smoothing out wax strips on finished candles. His movements were slow and meticulous, as if each candle held more than just light. The door creaked open, admitting the silhouette of May, a young neighbor. She carried a basket with apples from her orchard. "Tan," she called softly, setting down her load beside him. "May, how are you?" Tan asked without looking up, his eyes fixed on his work. I saw your candle stubs outside, May said, taking note of the discarded remnants. They were a waste. Not a waste, Tan corrected with a smile, turning towards her briefly. He took one stub and pressed it back into its mold with practiced hands. A moment later, he held up a newly formed candle that glowed warmly in the dim light. May watched him closely as she unwrapped an apple to offer him. I can never seem to make good use of anything. Tan wiped his palms on his apron and accepted the fruit. He took a bite, savoring it before speaking again. Every piece has its place, he said simply, holding out the core to her. She studied the seeds inside, then planted them thoughtfully in an empty pot beside her basket. She straightened and met Tan's eyes with a small nod. Thank you for showing me that tonight. She paused before adding, I'll bring more tomorrow. Tan resumed his work but kept one hand free to accept another offering from May when she returned the next evening. This time it was a bowl of fresh honeycomb. He dipped his finger into it and sampled its sweetness. Then he scooped up some wax shavings from his workspace and rolled them between his palms until they formed tiny candles themselves. Look, Tan said to her, offering one small candle. It's not waste when we remember to give everything a chance. May accepted the tiny candle, holding it reverently between her fingers. She turned then, as if deciding something significant without speaking of it. Outside in the twilight, she placed the stub candles she had collected carefully next to Tan's door along with fresh beeswax and flax fibers for wicks. Tan found them there later, after May was gone. He smiled softly at the collection laid out so thoughtfully, his hands already reaching for another candle stub. In the stillness of the workshop, only the faint hum of wax being remolded could be heard as he worked late into the night, each piece given a chance to shine once more.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. At dawn, in the quiet alley between two clay walls, Lou sits beside his cart of herbs.
At dawn, in the quiet alley between two clay walls, Lou sits on a worn wooden stool beside his cart of herbs. The morning light casts long shadows as it creeps through gaps in the weathered walls. A few paper lanterns hang from low rafters above him, now dull and lifeless without candles inside them. Beside Lou's stall is an old woman with tea leaves wrapped tightly in a burlap sack. She moves to set her cart next to his. You're early this morning. She greets him with a nod as she sets down her bundle on the ground. Lou smiles, wiping sweat from his brow. The first light of day suits me best. He straightens his back and looks over at her tea cart. Its surface cluttered but organized. Is it always like this around here? She glances up and around them, taking in the stillness before turning to him again. Sometimes I think the alley knows no rest, but the rest of us must find a place for it. She gestures to a small pot bubbling on low heat near her feet. Rest is easier found when we have something to do. Lou replies thoughtfully, picking up his scale and carefully placing roots onto it, then measuring their weight. As she sets about making tea from her leaves, the woman hums quietly under her breath. Why herbs? Lou pauses, looking down at his selection of dried plants before him. I find them grounding. Each has a story. Tea is much the same. The woman comments, pouring hot water over leaves in an iron teapot. They work quietly for some time. Lou prepares his remedies while she steeps her tea leaves. The occasional sound of wood scraping against clay or paper crinkling as they tend to their goods fills the space between them. At one point, he asks gently, "What brings you here?" She looks at him and then over his stall again before replying, "A habit." Her tone suggests more than just a routine. He nods in understanding without pressing further. As Lou weighs out his ingredients for an herbal mixture, the woman hands him a small cup of steaming tea. "This might help," she offers softly. He accepts it with gratitude and takes a sip. The warmth and flavor spread through his chest as he looks at her with a smile of thanks. She nods back without words, taking in his acknowledgement. The alley begins to stir with the first signs of morning traffic. soft murmurs from passing neighbors, and the click-clack of wooden sandals moving over worn stones. Lou straightens up and begins packing away his herbs neatly into small bags and bundles, as if preparing for a long day ahead. "Thank you," he says, bowing slightly toward her. Her response is to offer him one last cup before starting to pack up herself for the path. As they finish, she adds gently, "Some paths are quiet." She steps back from his stall and heads towards the street with the first sounds of a new day breaking around them. Lou watches her leave and then turns back to gather his things in preparation for another day. He places the empty cup carefully at the edge of his cart before tucking it into his belongings, ensuring it will travel safely home with him. A small gesture marking not just an end, but also the beginning of understanding between two people who share their quiet work and time together without ever needing to speak much about it.
The morning light finally touched the edges of his herbs, awakening their colors. A gate at the edge of a forest stood open, its hinges weathered by silent passings.
A gate at the edge of a forest stood open, its hinges weathered by countless silent passings. On either side, thick pines and undergrowth reached out to each other in an unspoken language. Inside the woods, birds sang softly. Outside, the air was cooler and more alive with the scent of earth. Eli stood just beyond the gate, his hand resting lightly on its worn surface. The wood beneath his fingers felt warm from the sun's embrace throughout the day. A figure appeared at the far end of the clearing, moving slowly toward him. It was Naomi, a woman he had known for years but never intimately. Naomi approached with a basket slung over her shoulder. She paused when she reached Eli and set down the basket, lifting her head to meet his gaze. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows that danced around them. "Is this where you come?" Naomi asked softly, not needing an answer. Eli nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to enter through the gate first. She walked in, turning back after a moment to smile at him. He returned her gesture with a slight nod, his eyes following her until she disappeared into the woods, leaving behind only the sound of rustling leaves underfoot. Days passed without much change in Eli's routine. The gate waited patiently for its keeper, and the forest whispered secrets to those who would listen. One afternoon, as the light began to fade, Naomi came back out of the woods. Her hands were clean this time, no longer carrying her basket. "Found what you needed?" he asked, though it wasn't a question she had come to answer. Naomi shook her head and handed him a small packet wrapped in cloth. Inside was a sprig from an unknown tree. "This might help," she said simply, turning toward the gate. Eli took the packet gently, unwrapping the cloth just enough to peek inside before carefully folding it back up. He didn't know what the sprig meant for him, but he accepted its gift with gratitude and a quiet smile. She paused again at the edge of the forest, looking back once more at Eli by the gate. "It's here," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind sighing through the pines. She stepped through the threshold and was gone, leaving behind only the rustle of leaves and a quiet calm. Eli lingered there for a moment longer before walking into the forest himself. The air grew cool against his skin as he made his way deeper in, the gate now silent at his back. As darkness fell around him, he stopped beneath an ancient oak and tied the sprig to its branch with a piece of twine. A soft breeze stirred the leaves above him, making them whisper secrets into the night. Below, Eli knelt down by the mossy ground, pressing his fingers against it, feeling the earth's gentle pulse through the soil. A single pine needle brushed across his cheek, catching in his hair, a fleeting touch that lingered in stillness.
A single star blinked to life above the treetops, unnoticed by anyone below. Under the faint glow of an oil lamp, Malan sat beside her grandmother's loom.
Under the faint glow of a single oil lamp, Ma Lan sat beside her grandmother's loom in the candlemaker's workshop. The air was thick with the smell of melting wax and old wood. Outside, the winter night pressed against the small window like a blanket drawn tight. Ma Lan had just returned from the market where she hoped to sell some handmade candles. But no one wanted them today, the days were too short, the weather too cold for frivolities. As she hung her basket on a peg and sat down next to the loom, she sighed deeply into the quiet of the room. Her grandmother, sitting opposite with an old candle in hand, did not look up from her work. She seemed absorbed in something deeper than just making candles. Ma Lan watched as she carved away small shavings with a dull knife, her hands moving almost without thought. "Grandmother," Ma Lan said softly after a moment, "why do you make so many candles?" The old woman paused and looked up at her granddaughter's face, which was still young but had lines of disappointment etched around the eyes tonight. She reached for another piece of wax and began to shape it again before she spoke. "We need light," she said simply, as if stating a fact no one could argue with. Ma Lan nodded, but she didn't move from her place beside the loom. Her grandmother resumed working on the candle, carving slowly, carefully, without looking up this time. They sat there for what felt like hours, both silent but not uncomfortable in their quiet space. The oil lamp flickered occasionally, casting shadows across the walls that moved gently with each breath of cold air slipping through a crack by the door. Ma Lan watched her grandmother's hands move steadily over the wax, forming it into something beautiful and useful. Her own thoughts wandered to brighter days when she had imagined selling these candles, helping people see in the darkness. Now those dreams seemed pale against this reality, but she felt no anger or regret, only a quiet understanding. "Will you teach me?" Ma Lan asked suddenly, surprising herself with her words. Her grandmother raised an eyebrow slightly and continued working for another minute before nodding slowly as if confirming something within herself more than answering the question. "Yes," was all she said, turning back to the candle now almost finished in her hands. Ma Lan took a deep breath of the warm workshop air scented with wax and wood smoke, and stood up from where she had been sitting. She moved closer to the loom and picked up an unshaped piece of wax, holding it between her fingers as if testing its weight before beginning to shape it herself under her grandmother's watchful but silent guidance. As they worked side by side, Ma Lan felt a warmth growing within her chest. Not because she understood some hidden meaning or had received some profound truth, rather, she was simply in the presence of something good and real, a light being made that would help others see their way through the dark. The night outside deepened as they continued to work, each candle another small flame against the encroaching darkness. The room filled with the rhythmic sound of wax being shaped by steady hands, two sets now moving in unison but with distinct patterns and intentions. Ma Lan's movements were not as practiced yet, but she found strength in her grandmother's silent support. When it was time to stop, they both stood up from their stools. The oil lamp had burned low and needed refilling. Ma Lan went to the cupboard where they kept a supply of clean wax. As she reached for the container, she felt her grandmother's hand gently pressing down on her shoulder. Ma Lan turned around, offering her grandmother a small, unspoken thanks before lifting the lid off the jar to scoop out more wax with her fingers. She held it up to her eyes in the dim light and saw how smooth and clean it was, perfect for shaping into candle after candle. She set about the task again, feeling her grandmother's presence close by but not intrusive, each of them lost in their work and the quiet understanding shared between them.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. Winter night pressed close around the workshop, holding stories in its quiet embrace. We close the door now. Until tomorrow.